Today on Treasure Hunting America, we'll join Bob Buttafuso and his hunting partners who look for Civil War relics in winter camps in Virginia.
The passion is holding that relic in your hand and knowing the soldier was the last person 145 years ago to touch that. You're the next person to touch it. That's the fascination in itself.
Then we'll meet John Kendrick, who's been hunting for Civil War relics for 40 years.
Back when I first started, there was campsites everywhere, and they were full of relics because nobody bothered about going into them. And there were just so many and so few relic hunters that it was very lucrative.
Finally, we'll talk with John Craig, who has a special gift for finding valuable Civil War artifacts.
One item I found was an identification disc of a soldier who was in a unit called, the Iron Brigade. He was in the 6th Wisconsin Volunteers. Private Gary was killed in action in Antietam on September 17, 1862, and is actually buried in the National Cemetery in Sharpsburg, Maryland. It's a very meaningful piece to dig an ID tag from a soldier in a famous unit like that ended up giving his life for what he believed in.
All coming up on Treasure Hunting America. Hello and welcome to another episode of Treasure Hunting America. I'm your host, Mark Hendricks. For the next half hour, we'll share some amazing stories of everyday treasure hunters across the country. With so much history on the East Coast, one can hunt for items dating back to the French Indian War or the Revolutionary War. For Bob Buttafuso, his favorite relics to hunt are those from the Civil War.
I got out of the service in the late 60s and always had the interest of finding targets in the ground. People had lost for centuries, or as long as man has been on the continent. I got into Civil War hunting because, naturally, Northern Virginia was just loaded with Civil War artifacts, and I've been hooked on Civil War artifacts ever since. I still can remember the first relic I ever dug. It was a bullet, and I still have it to this day. I've never sold anything. The items in themselves become part of you. You can look back and say, oh, I remember when I dug that button. I know what the weather was. I know the conditions. In a lot of cases, I can take you back to the exact hole in the ground. Of course, I cover my holes, but I can tell you exactly where I dug it. And that's part of the hobby. It's just the total interest, the research, the actual finding something, digging it up, and then collecting it and put it in a collection.
For Bob, relic hunting isn't just about finding treasure, it's about touching the past.
Somebody dropped this, and it's an old piece of history. When you get into Civil War relics, the interest becomes, at least to me, is when I dig that Civil War bullet or button, the last person to touch it was a soldier, 145 years ago, and I think it's just extremely personal. It's important to remember history because that's how we got to where we are today. I mean, what you dig up may not be something useful today, but it was the technology or whatever they had then. Let's say 100 years from now, they're going to be digging up stuff that we drop today. Now, the technology 100 years from now, they're going to look at this and say it was primitive, just like we look at stuff then, but it's history. It's how this country, this nation evolves all those years. This is probably my better buckles that I've dug over the years. You're looking at a case probably over $10,000 value-wise, which, like I said before, isn't really meaningful until I retire, anyways. The Georgia Militia I mentioned before was dug down in Somerset, Virginia. The Virginia buckle is probably my prized possession, living in Virginia, obviously. The sword belt plate, that's a Yankee sword belt plate with the attached wreath. That was dug in the Centerville area. The Baby US, which was used by cavalry, was dug in Centerville. These are a couple of real nice shaped breastplate, and that's a US buckle. I've dug hundreds of these, but these are probably in best condition.
When we return, Bob Buttafuso will take us out to a Civil War winter camp to dig up relics not seen in over 150 years. A favorite place for Bob and his friends to hunt is Civil War winter camps, and specifically the hut sites the soldiers dug and built to protect themselves from the chilly Virginia winters.
The last few years I've gotten into what we call the term hut digging. Digging the winter camps. Finding what we call a virgin camp is still the obsession of every relic hunter. Be the first one to walk into camp and buttons and bullets and stuff all over the place. It happens, but it's rare nowadays. Should start getting noisy in here. You can see the bricks from the fire pit. Yeah, you start picking up a lot of targets. There's a good target. Maybe. That's reading bucko, but I can't believe it's a... Yeah. Okay, that's where a tin from a canteen or ration can, the thin tin will give you a good signal. Very deceiving. Relic hunting isn't a geeky thing. I mean, it's as manly as hunting or fishing. I mean, it's work. That stuff doesn't come out of the ground and say, here I am. You gotta go find it. It's a hunt. I mean, it's kind of like a game, especially when you find that first relic. It's addictive. A lot of wives tell me, I don't see my husband anymore. I always say to them, look, he's not in a bar. You know, when you rather have him in the woods there, and she says, you're right, you know, and in that sense, plus he's getting exercise, but I like to see him a little more. These are my better of the Yankee buttons that I've dug over the years. This top 3 rows are all Vermont state seal buttons. There's a couple of Wisconsin buttons over here. These are Federal Artillery, meaning that you'll see a little A in the shield on each one of these. Some of these are 1-piece, some are 2-piece. This is a Pennsylvania National Guard and a script NG button.